also for yesterday's bipartisan retreat, which was delightful. I am looking forward to these very distinguished witnesses today and hope that all of us will listen attentively. I know that we will hear from our witnesses about the critical importance of federal research and development investments, and I look forward to that testimony. As the competition for scarce resources has intensified, there's been some who would describe the research community as just another special interest lobbying group to share the pie. I could not disagree more. They should have special interest and self-interest, and I hope they do, whether they are representing universities or high-tech companies. But to label them as nothing more than another special interest group is at best misleading. Without dismissing the value of many other investments we make with our limited discretionary budget, and there's probably no single investment we make other than education that has done more to ensure our nation's long-term economic vitality than the investment in R&D. This holds true for the very long-term investments that the federal government is uniquely suited to make an exploratory research, where we have no idea what, if any, applications will result. But it also holds true that the financial and intellectual partnerships we build with the private sector to address more midterm R&D challenges. All of these investments yield immeasurable benefits to our economy and our society in terms of companies built, jobs created, and society made a healthier, safer, and more secure. They also have the secondary benefit of training the next generation of scientists and engineers who will contribute in all of these ways in their own generation. And I'm particularly pleased to see a few of them sitting out there. I hope will be some of those in the future. Some specific examples of groundbreaking innovations in companies that would not have been possible without federal R&D investments include the Internet, GPS, Google, the iPhone, and God, what would we do without barcodes? I expect that we will hear more examples from the witnesses, and we could probably spend our entire 2-hour hearing reading off such a list. And yet, I fear some of my colleagues in Congress will still be unimpressed. We will still hear arguments that the federal government's role should be restricted to so-called basic research because the private sector can do the rest alone. That everybody has to take a cut. That is, the 8.2% cuts looming on March 1st may hurt a bit, but are better for the country in the long run. I happen to believe, personally, that we can invest it in unemployment and food stamps, or we can invest it in our future that would eliminate the need for both. So let me attempt to briefly preempt some of these arguments. R&D is not simple. Linear process from basic to applied to development and so on to a final commercial product. It also doesn't go in only one direction. R&D is part of a complex innovation process with many feedback loops. There's no clear line at which the public role ends and the private role begins, and there has not been in any of our lifetimes. That is why partnerships between the public sector, namely our federal agencies, and the private sector, such as Mr. Templeton's company, Texas Instruments, are so important. Second, I'd like to say a word about the consequences of sequestration. At the risk of repeating myself, we would not just be turning off the lights on many groundbreaking research facilities and experiments today. We would be eating our seed corn for tomorrow. We would know that at the end of the tunnel, the lights are out. What talented young person would see a future in scientific research after sequestration does its damage? Our witnesses were asked in their testimony to speculate on what kind of breakthrough technologies we might see in the next 5 to 20 years. I think if any of us knew the answer to that, we'd really be rich. That's the point. We don't know what directions our research might take, what unknown applications and innovations will be developed, and nor did our predecessors when they invested in what we have today. We cannot afford to overestimate what the private sector is prepared to do on its own, and we cannot afford to underestimate the negative consequences for the nation's R&D enterprise of letting sequestration go forward. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield.